The definition of conniving means to cooperate secretly, especially with harmful or evil intent. This is a story about one of the most sketchy and conniving individuals that I've ever had the misfortune to encounter in my life. Before we get into the story, should you wish to receive notifications of future videos that I'll be doing, please subscribe to my channel and click the bell notification icon to be notified when new videos are uploaded. Heugene Murray saw me as a patient on the 6th of December 2007. He was wanting bigger calves. He was an avid bodybuilder and wanted to have his calves enlarged with the goal of winning bodybuilding competitions. These are a picture of his calves immediately before his operation from the front and from behind, with him standing on his toes. And as is clearly visible, he certainly had perfectly acceptable calves. This obviously raises some serious questions because, as I understand it, the premise of a bodybuilding competition is that the bodybuilder increases his muscle size by lifting heavier weights and growing the size of his muscles naturally. The motive for having a calf implant to win a competition smacks of dishonesty and cheating. When I examined them, I noticed that he had fairly well-defined calves, but he specifically wanted to have huge calves. I explained to him that we normally do the larger muscle on the inner calf and that it was possible to do implants into both of the muscles on the back of the calf. Without hesitation, he requested to have both muscle bellies enlarged, and I discussed with him the various options in terms of size. As was my practice, I advised him of the most common risks associated with calf implants, and that is usually bleeding, major or minor, infection, misposition or malposition of the calf implant, as well as changes in sensation of the leg and foot due to stretching of the nerves that occurs during the operation. It normally recovers. Of interest, on the file cover that he filled out here, there was a section specifically dedicated to inquiring about whether he was currently taking any medication. And as you can see from the zoomed in portion of the file, he categorically stated that he was not. Non-disclosure of critical information effectively amounts to deception and a lie. And this was the first of many, many lies that he told. In my discussion with him, he did disclose that he was using steroid, but as he says, everyone does it. He came in for his operation on the 21st of December 2007. And prior to the operation, I took him into a small anteroom to take photographs and do the necessary markings. He was duly anesthetized for the operation, which was done with him lying on his stomach. Now, the principles of the operation are relatively simple, and that being making a cut or an incision on the back of the knee, the skin of the knee, and then the muscle, and then making a tiny incision on the fibrous covering of the muscle, which is called the fascia. And then using the outside skin markings, taking a blunt dissecting instrument and then creating a pocket in the fascia to accommodate the implant. Now, what was very strange about this particular case was that the blunt instrument I was using had a tendency to dive into the actual substance of the muscle, which was very unusual in that normally muscle is very firm and will resist any penetration by a blunt instrument. If you can imagine taking a fillet steak and then trying to push the handle of a kitchen knife into the steak, it will be virtually impossible as the handle will tend to slide over the surface of the steak. The procedure should take no more than about an hour, and considering I was inserting 2 implants on each side, I thought maybe an hour and 20 minutes. After experiencing much difficulty, I eventually managed to place all 4 implants where they should have been. But in this case, the operation took over 2 hours to complete, which is somewhat unusual. Once he was awake, he was moved to the recovery room, and during the course of the morning, the staff were concerned about the circulation in his feet. And after removing the bandages, the circulation was completely adequate. He also complained of a loss of sensation in his left foot, but I ascribed this to the use of a mixture of a long-acting local anesthetic, which I injected, a mixture of anesthetic and adrenaline, which I injected into the operative field to minimize blood loss, as well as for post-operative pain. He was duly discharged, and I sent him home at about 6:30 that evening. And I had a call at about 6:30 from the pharmacist asking if I could prescribe some additional pain medication, which I did. Now, this is not unusual, as a calf implant is quite a painful procedure. On Saturday morning, the 22nd of December, Mr. Murray contacted me to explain that he was experiencing nausea and had considerable pain. And I was, in any event, due to see him for a post-operative follow-up visit. When I saw him, he was clearly in a great deal of pain, and I checked the circulation in his feet, which was completely adequate. I gave him an injection of morphine and prescribed some additional pain relief. As he had difficulty in walking, I then provided him with a wheelchair to allow him to get around the house. The next day, Sunday the 23rd of December, I sent him a text message to inquire whether he still had severe pain. And he replied saying the pain was much improved and that he was very comfortable. On Monday, the 24th of December, I picked up my cell phone to see that there had been many missed calls from him and a text message saying that he felt that something was wrong. I immediately told him to go to my clinic where I would see him there. When I saw him and inspected his legs, I was extremely concerned. And because the leg had a dark, mottled appearance, and I was worried. I told him the only option would be to remove the implants from the leg as a matter of urgency. And I immediately took him to the operating theatre and opted to rather than move the implants under sedation than delay in getting an anaesthetist, which could have taken a good hour, hour and a half. In any event, removal of a calf implant under these circumstances is a relatively simple procedure and certainly didn't warrant having a general anesthetic. Following removal of the implant from his left leg, there was a dramatic improvement in the circulation, and I observed him for approximately 1.5 hours, after which I sent him home. Christmas came, and then on Boxing Day I went out to do a house call at his home in Brakpan, and his circulation appeared adequate, but he still had a fair amount of pain. He had sufficient antibiotics and pain relief, and I told him that I would see him the next day in my rooms. He came in the following day, and I was still somewhat concerned about his condition. And I thought it was probably best and safest to have him admitted to hospital for observations. He had the audacity to ask him to lend him money for his admission, and I explained to him that this was simply not regular nor possible. I visited him in the ward that evening, and he appeared comfortable, and there was nothing remarkable on examination. No warning signs. On my ward rounds on the subsequent days, there was no signs of anything to be concerned about. And when I saw him on the 29th of December, I felt that he was ready for discharge, but said that he should stay in for the remainder of the day. And as I was due to go on holiday to Plettenberg Bay, I asked a surgeon to look after him. On reaching Port Elizabeth, I turned on my phone to see a long list of missed calls from the hospital, and I immediately called them back, only to be told They were extremely worried about him. And I duly arranged an orthopedic and vascular surgeon to see him. They scheduled him to take him to the operating theatre that night for an exploratory operation. But by this time, it was absolutely out of the question for my wife and I to continue with our holiday, and we decided to return to Johannesburg as soon as possible. Unfortunately, there were no flights out of Port Elizabeth that evening, and the earliest flight back to Johannesburg was from East London. So we hired a car, immediately drove to East London, stayed in a B&B until the next morning, and then flew back. By this stage, I heard nothing from the orthopedic or vascular surgeon, and it was only when I got back to Johannesburg when I was told that Mr. Murray's leg was unsalvageable and they had to perform a below-knee amputation. As you can imagine, I was absolutely devastated by this news, as it was a catastrophe of galactic proportions. As difficult as it was, I went to see him in ICU and I was deeply distraught, and he seemed to be quite accepting, and I left realizing that there were very stormy waters lying ahead. As expected, it wasn't long before I received a claim for damages from his attorney, the very same attorney that Myrna Bothma used, and you can have a look at that video to get details on that. In the January of the following year, 2008, I started getting calls from many people who were in no way connected to each other, stating that it was common knowledge in the gym that he had been injecting a substance into his calf muscles. The reports were from reliable sources, one being a personal trainer at the gym he went to, and another from a couple who stayed in the same area as Murray, and they also went to the gym. And it was then that I recall my nurse coming into me a few days before the operation and saying that Mr. Murray had come in and asked to ask me if it had okay if he'd been injecting his muscles. No further details, no specifics. I assumed that he was referring to steroids, and this certainly wasn't a contraindication to having the operation. I then had a female advocate who was a patient of mine who was living in the same area as Murray, who came to see me and said that one Saturday morning she was in the hairdresser in Brakpan and happened to be sitting next to Mr. Murray's wife, who was also having her hair done. His wife, whose name was Candace, was relating in a very emotional and tearful fashion how Mr. Murray had essentially brought this upon himself, as he had been injecting a substance into his calf muscles to enlarge them. A few months later, I was chatting with the son of a friend of mine. I'll call him Peter to preserve his anonymity. He was an avid bodybuilder, and he supplied bodybuilders with various supplements, shakes, steroids, the whole thing. Heugene Murray was well known in the bodybuilding community, and this young man said that it was an open secret that Murray was injecting his calves with a substance. Peter managed to get hold of a bottle of this substance that Murray was using. That was what just dropped on the floor, and I'll show it to you shortly. I then recalled a story about an orthopedic surgeon colleague of mine who told me about a bodybuilder who was injecting a substance called Synthol into his biceps muscles. And it turned out to be an absolute mess, and the bodybuilder had extensive infection and abscesses in his muscle and subsequently lost a major portion of his biceps muscles. Synthol is regarded as a temporary implant that is injected deep into the small muscles such as the biceps, triceps, deltoids, and of course calf muscles down there. It is composed of almost oil, and it is marketed as posing oil, but it is actually used to inject straight into the muscle. The substance hasn't been authorized by any country's medical pharmaceutical registration authorities, including South Africa. The potential hazardous side effects that I encountered when researching Synthol on the internet was that muscles can become deformed and move into an unnatural shape. There can be nerve damage, pulmonary embolism, which is when a clot seeds into the bloodstream and becomes lodged in the lungs, blockage of the pulmonary artery, myocardial infarction or heart attack, extensive infections, and an increased rate of cerebral stroke. As you can see, there are some very serious consequences and risks associated with using this substance. I'm just going to show you the results of Synthol injections. And in these pictures, you can see the significant disfigurement that may occur with the use of this substance. So you have a situation with a person with absolutely no knowledge or training in anatomy is blindly injecting an unregulated substance into the muscle with no ideas of the situation of the arteries, veins, and nerves in a limb, and injecting whatever quantity they see fit. As you can see from these pictures, there's nothing more than a gross disfigurement of the musculature, and I suggest you Google Synthol and it will make your hair stand on end. I found an interesting article in the International Journal of Sports Medicine, which very adequately demonstrates the extreme dangers associated with the use of this illicit substance. And the use alone would be dangerous enough, but then to go and have a calf implant done without informing the surgeon of what you've been doing can only be described as incredibly idiotic and grossly negligent. I'll go through the abstract with you, and the article is entitled Irreversible Muscle Damage in Bodybuilding Due to Long-Term Intramuscular Oil Injection. We present a case of a 40-year-old male semi-professional bodybuilder with systemic infection and painful reddened swellings of the right upper arm, forcing him to discontinue weightlifting. Over the last 8 years, he daily self-injected sterilized sesame seed oil at numerous intramuscular locations for the purpose of massive bodybuilding. Whole body MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, showed more than 100 intramuscular rather than subcutaneous oil cysts and loss of normal muscle anatomy. Two-step septic surgery of the right arm revealed pus-filled scar tissue with a near complete absence of normal muscle. MRI 1 year later revealed the absence of relevant muscle generation. Persistent pain and inability to perform normal weight training were evident for at least 3 years post-surgery. This alarming finding indicates irreversible muscle mutilation, hopefully may discourage people interested in bodybuilding and fitness from oil injections. Clearly, Murray didn't do any research, because any rational, intelligent human being doing a modicum of research on this substance would not inject a single milliliter into their bodies. Now, this is what Peter gave me, and he had very easy access to it, and he was able to get it within about a half an hour. And this is what Murray was injecting. It's called Perfection Oil, and as you can see, it comes in a bottle of 300 mils. And on the label it says, for professional bodybuilding use, and underneath it says, instant muscle size. Let's have a look at the information on the bottle. In this pic it says, for instant muscle size. Warning, excessive amounts in one area could cause a cyst. Prolonged use may be dangerous. Avoid arteries. Imagine that. I wonder if a bodybuilder has the vaguest idea of where the arteries are situated. Do not mix with any other injectable substance. And in all caps it says, use is at own risk. Store at room temperature and out of direct sunlight. Keep away from children. Maybe they might start injecting this shit into their muscles. May contain traces of peanut. What? Peanut oil or cocktail peanuts? I fail to see how a warning a bodybuilder with absolutely no knowledge of human anatomy would have any impact on them limiting the quantities that they use. Prolonged use may be dangerous. Well, that's an understatement, if ever I heard one. Perhaps they should say, don't inject your muscles if you're intending on having calf implants to try and win bodybuilding competitions, or at least tell the plastic surgeon that is doing the calf implants that you are injecting this shit into your muscles, and give the surgeon an option to go ahead with the operation or not. They say use is at own risk, but there's certainly no website or manufacturer stated anywhere on the label. Let's have a look at the other part of the product information on the bottle. It comes in a 300 milliliter container, and they advise you to swab the area thoroughly half an hour before training, and between 1 and 3 mils per site on a weekly basis. Recommended sites: deltoids, triceps, biceps, and calves. The manufacturer cannot be held responsible for any injury occurred due to the misuse or abuse of this product. Brilliant grammar. Well, that certainly didn't deter Mr. Murray from holding his plastic surgeon responsible for the loss of his leg and keep him mum about the whole saga. Not satisfied with an astronomical award in a damages claim, he then goes on to partake with great relish in a vile and slanderous media campaign to perpetuate his diabolical lie. Let's have a look at some of the pictures I managed to find of him online. Here is one where he's posing for his picture for an estate agent, a franchise estate agent. Strange enough, I've actually seen him standing on the side of the road and seen his signboards as well, but for some reason they disappeared very quickly. This one was taken of him at the commencement of the hearings at the HPCSA, and this was midwinter on a bitterly cold day. And one can only speculate that he was attempting to milk maximum sympathy from the committee. Here is another one posing with his tracksuit. And here's another one with him on the athletics track preparing for some event. Here is one entitled, Heugene Murray lost his leg after Gordon botched his calf implant surgery. He certainly doesn't have any hesitation in perpetuating his lie in the media. So at this stage of the story, it is readily apparent that Murray was injecting perfection oil into his calf muscles and didn't deem it necessary to inform me of this fact. The extreme difficulty I experienced when doing this operation was due to multiple pockets of oil within the muscle, which had completely disrupted the normal anatomy of the calf muscle. And in doing so, I had inadvertently damaged the muscle, which ultimately resulted in what's called a compartment syndrome. A compartment syndrome is normally diagnosed where the doctor has a high index of suspicion due to the nature of the injury. Typically, it will occur with a crush injury of the leg, such as a motorcycle or motor vehicle accident. What happens is that the muscle is surrounded by a rigid envelope called the fascia, which is completely unyielding. It won't budge. And if the muscle is damaged in any form, it will result in the muscle swelling. But the fascia is rigid, and this results in the cutting off of the blood supply to the muscle and the leg, for that matter. As the blood supply is compromised and oxygen doesn't get to the muscle fibers, this results in further swelling, which is then a vicious circle. The treatment involves making long cuts in the skin and the fascia to allow the muscle to bulge out and to relieve the pressure within the muscle. And that in turn will allow adequate circulation to the muscle, and that will recover. I was completely oblivious as to what Heugene Murray had been up to prior to the operation. And had he divulged this to me and said at any stage, before, immediately post-operative, there may have been a chance to remove the implants and salvage his leg. He opted to rather keep quiet, which resulted in him losing his leg. And then he had the audacity to institute a medical malpractice claim against me, in which he received approximately 4.5 million rand. Of course, his attorney would have taken at least 25% of that. Not bad for drafting a few documents. At this stage of the story, you may be thinking to yourself, oh, this Luke Gordon, he's making this up. There's certainly no solid evidence to back up the story. The fact that he'd been approached proactively from in the region of 5 independent sources who had no connection with each other, and that they all told him the same story about Murray injecting his calves, and that he'd brought it on himself, is irrelevant, and it's pure fabrication and hearsay. Okay, I grant you that. Well, this is where the story gets really interesting. On the 24th of August 2010, nearly 3 years after the incident, I was busy consulting, and I remember it was a particularly busy morning with many patients to see. And my receptionist at the time came in at about mid-morning, 10:30, and said something to the effect of, "Dr. Gordon, there's a Gene here to see you." To which I asked, had this person made an appointment? And my receptionist replied that he hadn't, and I said that he should wait until the end of the morning and I could see him then. I completely forgot about this incident. And eventually at about 1 o'clock, I finished my last patient and I went into the kitchen of our facility, and my receptionist came in and said that Jean was waiting to see me. I looked at my wife and said, looked puzzled, and she said, "It's Heugene Murray." I was clearly confused and I had no idea as to why he was coming to visit me so many years after the incident. But I saw no harm in it, and as far as I was concerned, it was water under the bridge, and I was somewhat curious to see what he had to say. Fortunately, the last thing my wife said to me at the time was, "Record this." And I duly turned on my recording device and entered my office. Sure enough, there was Heugene Murray. He stood up, and with a beaming smile on his face, he shook my hand and he greeted me. Before I play for you the recording of this conversation, I want to ask you a question, and think of your answer as you follow along this conversation. Imagine that you'd had some form of cosmetic surgery done. For example, a facelift, a eyelid bag correction, some form of breast surgery, a tummy tuck, liposuction of your arms, or for that matter, a calf implant. Now imagine for a moment that this operation has gone catastrophically wrong and you had sustained major disfigurement from the surgery, be it loss of an arm or a leg, or loss of eyesight, or massive scarring on your face as a result of the botched operation. You get the idea. You've been paid out a massive settlement in a claim for damages, and it's 3 years down the line. Would you go out, seek out and go visit the doctor who had botched your operation and conduct a conversation along the lines that you're about to hear? Listen to this, and I will discuss each aspect of this conversation once it is done.
What's up, man? Good, thank you.
Take a seat.
Had a chat with your wife now.
Hell, man. You keeping well?
Yeah. I just, I've got to come to you and speak to you, and but I need to get off my chest.
Okay, I appreciate it.
What happened, happened. The past gone over. Don't keep grudges.
Yeah.
When past your place many times to come in here, but I've got the guts now to come see you.
Yeah.
My life changed dramatically, but I'm a better off person. I work harder. I do great in my athletics, my sports.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to come and show you that I didn't go sit in the corner and cry. But
Yeah. No, I'm glad, and I, as I say, I think it took a lot of guts to come in, and secretly, I'm glad that you got sorted out with some sort of compensation.
It will never bring back my life.
No.
Will never change my life.
Yeah.
Just make my life comfortable for short period of time.
Absolutely, yeah.
But,
absolutely, yeah.
You know what? My kids is very proud of me, and that's what I wanted. I actually did this for them. I stood up. I fight this whole thing because one day when they also I want them not to be failures. I also want to fight problems. They will come a problem.
Yeah.
This is actually the biggest reason I went through all this.
Yeah.
I'm doing excellent with my sports.
Yeah. I believe so. I believe you're doing well with.
Top athlete now, practically for years now. My disciplines. And I got us Olympics. So,
I'm very pleased. As I say, it was an awful experience for both of us. I promise you. But again, I've also grown through it as well. I mean, it was. I went through a lot of problems. Yes, after I lost my leg, then my trainer died. Remember, yes.
He died.
Oh God.
In April.
Yeah.
And my wife left me.
Yeah.
Terrible ordeal.
In fact, you went to Sculpt Brits.
Yeah.
He's a very good friend of mine, and he told me you were coming, and I said, fantastic. I've got no issue with it. It's, so, and of course, I don't know any background. It's totally confidential. He's the only attorney which I trust with. Because he tells you how it is up front. There's no bullshit or anything. But thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. As I say. Also I went through a tough time, because, well, as I say, there's. Look, obviously your thing was this was a huge blow to my psyche. It was a terrible thing to have to go through. But as I say, I learned a lot. And again, like yourself, you've got to pick yourself up and dust yourself off, and then take on the world. You know what I mean? And it has made me a better person. I wouldn't choose to go through it. I wouldn't say, look, this is cool. But otherwise, and it's also been very, in terms of work-wise, it's been very, very quiet. We've been hit, the whole industry's been hit badly, But overall, it's been great, man. I'm happy to do it, Why don't we do that?
Look, my life, the end of my life actually started. But I'm glad everything is fine. Be your friends, I don't want to be enemies with you.
No.
I want to be your friend for the rest of my life, and.
No. Absolutely. As I say, my whole. You had to do what you had to do, and I appreciate that. Secretly, I appreciate it. You know what I mean? you had to get compensated for what happened. And you know, there are forces out there which are really they're bad forces, like my colleagues, which, you know, those are the people I've got issues with. As I say, if you said you want to go out for dinner, have a beer, I've got no problem. I think you've still got my number, haven't you? Or,
No.
I'll take your number, and maybe we touch base and we chat, because I think you know, as I say,
You got this now to play golf.
yeah. What is your number, Eugene?
03 52 777
Yeah.
98
08.
98.
98.
You also left.
Yeah. And I promise you, every time I fly out of Blackpan a lot, and whenever I fly over your place, I think, are you still there in that same place, or?
No, I moved.
Is it? Yeah.
After my wife left me with my own way, she went
why, any particular reason?
Oh, she said, I don't know how true this, she's in a French spoke, and she said, she's still young and she's not going to sit with a cripple rest of her life.
Yeah.
That was one reason. And the other reason is she met a young boy, 22-year-old guy.
Oh, wow.
So,
Yeah.
it's her decision.
Yeah.
It's just, I told his boyfriend, listen here, there's a child involved here.
Yeah.
And just act as a mentor or father, whatever to her.
Yeah.
Be good to her, that's it.
Yeah.
The woman open her mind. For you, you've got a great wife. You know, I think she's stuck with you. She went through all this nonsense with you. No, she's a good wife.
Yeah.
I take my hat off her wife. Really.
No, she is. No, she's a wonderful woman. Because I don't think many women would have, because I had shit with the medical. I don't know if you know the shit I had with the medical council. I'll tell you about it. It's a horror story. Yeah. But the bottom line is that the professional jealousy in my profession is terrible. And there's people who hate the fact that I've done what I've done here.
Unfortunately, that's what I say. The eye is branches, catches all the wind.
That's a good
You're
thing.
a very good doctor.
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah.
Was your father a doctor?
No, he was a teacher. Yeah.
I heard you were a very, very good doctor.
Yeah.
He told me. Unfortunately, some mistakes happen.
Of course.
People make mistakes. You know, nobody's perfect.
Absolutely.
Nobody. The guy takes down his pens and he goes in the toilet. It's all the same. You know?
No, absolutely. And there's no.
That's why I came here. I don't hold any grudges. I just come and see you and say, ask you how are you. And, you know, I don't have enemies out there. I don't want enemies. I used to have enemies before this. This made me a better person. Look, I promise you.
Yeah.
I say thank you, but
of course, no. I mean, nobody.
It actually made me realize what the fuck is happening around me. I actually realized what is important in my life. Money is not important to me. Just my children, my family.
Of course. Yeah.
There's no money that can replace them.
And you know, that's what I also realized. 4 or 5 years ago, I just wanted to make fucking lots of money. And I also realized that, you know, you can't replace family, you can't replace, and it's not the most important thing in the world. Quality of life is the most important thing, you know.
Well, you're still going to make me 5 years younger.
Yeah. Well, come for some Botox, man. You know.
This is pain. This is all pain.
Yeah.
You know what? I enjoy it. The only thing that bothers me is phantom pains.
Oh, is it?
A lot of phantom pains. Yes, I went through a hard time. Yes, so this leg. But I'm winning. Yes,
Yeah.
You know, every day when I wake up, I say to myself, yes, it's another day. Can't wait to put on my leg. It starts getting a natural thing.
Yeah.
Like for instance, if I look at Oscar Pistorius, who's our top athlete in the world, you know, he was 8 months when he lost his legs. But polio, his legs off, so he doesn't know how to feel to have legs by losing one. That first 10 months when I lost my leg, it was tough. Really tough. I'm still on crutches and the thing must heal and Then I got my leg. I met this beautiful, excellent guy in Pretoria. A guy who's got passion for his work, you know, when he's got passion. And I guess when he put my leg on from there on, my first step, I just said to myself, today is the first step, tomorrow is 2 steps, after that 3 steps. I just went carrying on, went forward. And I did my first 100-meter running this weekend.
Oh, wow. So you obviously know Oscar then, eh?
I fell 5 meters forward. I know Oscar, he's just in a different class than me.
Yeah.
You know, I've met so many people out there, especially people that's disabled. Yes, they touch my heart big time, because I know how it feels.
Yeah.
And, that's my thing when I get into charity and start helping people. That's my goal.
Fantastic, man. Have you met anybody, relationship-wise?
Yeah, I've met a girl, but hey, I'm scared, man. My wife actually hurt me a lot.
Your wife's name was Teresa, eh?
That was Candace.
Candace, yeah.
She hurt me a lot.
Yeah.
She hurt me a lot.
Yeah.
I'm just scared to trust any woman at the moment.
Yeah.
But I believe the Lord will put somebody in my path.
Sure. No, absolutely.
The right person.
Yeah.
I'm actually reading a book that says God wants me to be single. But not single like alone. He wants me to be single first, have a relationship with Him first, then a relationship with Him. That's actually what He wants me to do.
Yeah.
Because that thing actually brought me closer to God.
That's the thing. It's the things that we least expect. You know, the tragedies and the adversity in our life. You know.
I count my blessings every day.
Me too. As I said, it's that these terrible things. I swear, I was suicidal after your thing. I nearly fucking. Yeah. No, look, it's a very traumatic thing, and it's made me a stronger person. And again, I'd like to think I'm a better doctor now. You know, and they say an expert.
Remember, God gave you a talent that He didn't give me. You know, you can work with your hands, knowledge and. I'm a good estate agent.
Are you still doing?
Yeah.
And the market's picking up a bit now, eh? Yeah. 100%, Eugene.
Let's go for a beer.
I'll give you a shot. I will give you a shot. I'll give you a beer.
Play golf.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, Eugene, keep on, eh? Okay, cheers, eh?
As you can see from the discussion, there's absolutely no hint of hostility or anger or any suggestion of him coming to see me to forgive me. One of the first things he says to me is that he wanted to come and see me because he had to get it off his chest. I googled the exact meaning of to get something off one's chest, and these were some of the definitions I encounter. Quote, to reveal or discuss something that has caused one emotional discomfort and that one has repressed, kept, hidden, or neglected to discuss earlier. Unquote. Quote, to tell someone about something that has been worrying you or making you feel guilty for a long time. Unquote. There is simply no ambiguity here. This was an indication that there was something that was weighing heavily on his conscience and that he had to come and unburden himself to make himself feel better. He then goes on to say that what happened, happened. It's past, gone, over, and that he doesn't keep grudges. Well, judging by his conduct some 3 years later, with him riding on the media bandwagon, it would appear that he did keep grudges. He then goes on to say, I went past your place many times to come in here, but I got the guts now to come and see you. So this wasn't just a spur of the moment thing. It had clearly been troubling him for a long time, and he had at last summoned up the courage to come and see me. Why? To what end? He then goes on to say that his life has changed and that he's a better person. So he would come and show me that he didn't sit in the corner and cry about it. I can't really see the relevance of that, and just another demonstration of the narcissistic nature, as most of the conversation centers around him and how he coped with this whole episode. He gets all philosophical about the fact that he was compensated, but he will never get his leg back, and that it has made his life comfortable for a short period of time. Well, the fact is, he severely prejudiced me in my practice because as a result of his fraudulent claim, I lost my malpractice cover and had to practice bare. An incredibly stupid decision of mine, given the circumstances that were about to unfold in the following years. I understand from a number of sources that he blew through his settlement like a profligate, buying expensive cars and the like. Had he invested his settlement at an annual return of, say, 10% of the capital, he could have had a monthly income of around 37 grand. But no, he blew through it like a lottery winner. An attorney friend of mine said to me a few years later that she was involved in evicting him from his residence as he refused to pay rent. He was flat broke. He talks about his kids being very proud of him and that he did it for them. And he thought this whole thing, and that he wanted to be a role model for them to be able to fight problems. I wonder how his kids would feel once they've watched this video and they realize that he's a liar and a fraudster, and that he partook in the destruction in the career of a plastic surgeon. He then goes on to blow his trumpet about how wonderful he was doing in the Paralympics, and quite frankly, I didn't give a rat's ass about his endeavors in the disabled sports arena. Eventually, he gets around to asking me how I was doing and whether I was all right. I related how terribly traumatic it was for me, and that how I'd weathered the storm, and I hinted at the particularly sinister forces which were clearly at work to orchestrate my undoing. Incredibly, he then goes on to ask when we are going to have dinner together. Imagine that. Now, I ask you with tears in my eyes, why on earth would you want to go to dinner with the plastic surgeon that botched your operation, as the press are so fond of repeating ad nauseum? He then goes on to say graciously, I'm glad everything is fine with you, and I want to be your friend. I don't want to be enemies with you. I want to be your friend for the rest of my life. Again, the question is why? Why would you want to befriend the plastic surgeon who botched your calf operation? Unless, of course, you had a terrible crisis of conscience and you wanted to ingratiate yourself to the surgeon to make yourself feel better about committing a terrible wrong on an innocent man. Quite inexplicably then, I then asked him for his number, if it was still the same, and he says, "You've got to teach me how to play golf, please." Well, please excuse the typo in the subtitles where it says gold. It meant golf. He goes on to give me his number and quite patronizingly also asks me if I'm also a lefty. We then go on to talking about how his wife left him and she didn't want to be with a cripple for the rest of her life. Then he goes on to singing praises about my wife. Wow, how gracious. And how she had stuck with me through this nonsense, and what a good wife she was. I went on to make another allusion to the sinister forces that have been conspiring to take a wrecking ball to my career. And then he says, "The highest branches catches all the wind," which is kind of a backhanded accolade to my capabilities and character. He then says that he thinks that I'm a very good doctor, and asks whether my father was a doctor. What the fuck? Was he trying to just make small talk? And again he reached at, "You are a very, very good doctor." Not just a good, mind you, but a very, very good doctor. For what reason would you say that to the plastic surgeon who botched your operation and resulted in your being an amputee? He then acknowledges that mistakes happen and nobody's perfect. Whoopie-doo. That certainly didn't come into the equation when he was instituting a claim for damages for loss of a leg, knowing full well that he was the architect of his own misfortune. Again, he gets philosophical, saying that he came to see me and that he didn't hold grudges and that he didn't have enemies and he didn't want enemies. Well, that's not entirely true, because at the time of this shitstorm, I was contacted by a number of people from different walks of life and his colleagues in the estate agent industry, and they said that he was a complete arsehole and he was intensely disliked in the industry. Enigmatically, he says, I'm not saying thank you, but, and then gets all philosophical about realizing what's important in his life, and that money was not important, and it was in fact his children and family, and that money couldn't replace them. Gosh, wasn't he consistent in his philosophy 3 years later, when he was speaking to any journalist with a tape recorder or a camera? It didn't really seem to suit him to divulge the truth of the matter as he was basking in the media attention. It doesn't stop there, and he goes on to say, you're still going to make me 5 years younger. Again, at the risk of sounding like a stuck record, is this the sort of thing you're going to say to the plastic surgeon that botched your calf operation and ruined your life? The conversation once again turns to the boring monologue about how much pain he's had and the various phantom pains and how he takes each day at a time. And of course, inevitably, the name dropping starts when he mentions his close friendship with Oscar Pistorius. I'm kind of not sure that I would be wanting to name drop Oscar Pistorius' name in an effort to impress people. He rambles on and on about how a whole incident has enriched his life, and that's how his heart has been touched by disabled people, and he finally gets to the subject of his wife, and how his wife had hurt him. Then he goes on to a rambling discourse about how God will find him a partner, and how this thing has brought him closer to God. I wonder what God would say about the fact that he had lied about injecting perfection oil into his legs and then putting in a fraudulent claim and perjuring himself at the HPCSA hearings. I went to talk about how tragedies and adversities can enrich our lives, and that I was actually suicidal after the incident happened. And in contradiction to his friend Myrna Bothma, he says that he was glad that I didn't commit suicide. Just to remind you, Myrna Bothma was another complainant who actually did want me to push me to suicide, as she was part of her attorney's dream team and hired guns. Yet again, he goes on to blow smoke up my arse and says, God gave you the talent that he didn't give me, and he's worked your hands, your knowledge and purpose in life. Well, he certainly was rejoicing when the media spewed the poisonous headlines and vitriol about me when I was finally removed from the role of practitioners in a rigged trial. Again, he says, let's go for a beer, and do I play golf? And that I was going to have to teach him how to play golf. I think it's fairly safe to assume that, barring giving me a blowjob, he was seriously intent on ingratiating himself to me. And he says that he just wants to be my friend. So let's just recap the situation. You have a bodybuilder who's desperate to attain huge calves. He engages in an extremely dangerous practice of injecting an unregistered and essentially illegal substance into his calf muscles. That doesn't work to his satisfaction. So he decides to go and see a plastic surgeon, me, to have calf implants inserted. He deliberately withholds the fact that he's been injecting an illegal substance into his calf muscles and allows the plastic surgeon to innocently proceed with the operation. The operation ends catastrophically, with him losing his leg. He then goes ahead with the claim for damages, fully knowing that he's the architect of his own misfortune. He knowingly and intentionally commits what amounts to insurance fraud and a scam. He gets paid out a massive settlement, essentially on false pretenses. And the implicit, if not explicit, terms of a settlement agreement is that he gets his award and that's the end of the matter. Essentially, he makes a promise and has a contractual obligation that he will preserve the defendant, the plastic surgeon's reputation, by keeping the whole saga out of the media. He has a crisis of conscience and spills his guts to the very plastic surgeon who did the operation, really to appease his own guilty conscience. Years later, he's approached by his attorney, who now says he wishes to launch a class action at the HPCSA in order to have the doctor removed from the role of practitioners with the goal of depriving the plastic surgeon of a means of earning a living. The plastic surgeon is deprived from earning a living for 7 years and counting, due to countless delays and postponements, and suffers unimaginable financial hardship. Mr. Murray now agrees to renege on the terms of the settlement, essentially to break a promise that he had made in order to be part of the so-called class action. He then basks in the media attention, all the while knowing that he's aiding and abetting and perpetuating an egregious lie. The conduct of the attorney can only be described as disgustingly unethical and dishonest. And this person purports to be a fit and proper person. Really? A fit and proper person? Is this the conduct of a fit and proper person who acts in an ethical and honourable fashion? Both the conduct of the attorney and himself can only be described as reprehensible, despicable, and disgusting. In a future video, I'll actually expose the actual motives for his attorney's conduct, which is even more shocking and reprehensible. I wonder whether Murray's employer is aware of his moral fibre, or lack thereof. A person that engages in lies, deception, and flagrant dishonesty. They are unleashing a man of questionable integrity on the public, who is dealing with buyers and sellers in a profession which demands the utmost honesty and integrity. Now, if Mr. Murray had had a modicum of decency and honour, he would have, from the start, acknowledged that he was grossly negligent in his conduct and backed off from instituting a claim for damages. But no, he carries on and proceeds with his claim for damages, receives a massive settlement, blows the proceeds like a profligate, and years later colludes with his attorney to destroy the reputation and livelihood of an innocent doctor with relish and schadenfreude. As an aside, my legal representatives in this matter never chose to have the recording of this conversation between Murray and myself adduced in evidence and cross-examine him extensively on the content of this conversation. The disciplinary committee also didn't seem to regard it with much significance, as I was afforded only an opportunity to relate the contents of the conversation. Not that I believe it would have made much difference, because the outcome of the hearings were determined way in advance, and I believe that even with the best legal representative in the world, it wouldn't have made a jot of difference. The big question is, of course, why would have Murray colluded in this witch hunt? In the light of the fact that he'd been compensated substantially almost a decade previously, he had come to me in an extremely contrite fashion nearly 3 years after the incident, almost begging for forgiveness. Why would he partake in this media circus some 7 years later? I have reason to believe that it is likely and extremely probable that he was paid to do so. This, of course, raises the level of this atrocity to another level completely. I'll discuss more about this in a future video as to why I suspect that all the complainants were compensated financially to lodge their complaint at the HPCSA. I don't have conclusive proof, but I know for certain there are people out there that know the truth, and that the only way we could get to the truth would be for somebody with integrity and where their conscience has bothered them, for them to come forward with rock solid evidence to ultimately bring the real perpetrators to book. I'm going to conclude by showing you a video of one of the brightest minds in the world today, that of Jordan Peterson, where he refers to the twisting of the fabric of reality.
It's like, stay awake, speak properly, be honest, or watch the hell out, because things will come your way that you just do not want to see at all. And it might not just be you, it might be everyone you know and everything about your culture that is demolished for generation after generation. It's like, stay awake and be careful. And I think that people only don't believe that when they're being hubristic. And I think that most people know that deep in their hearts. You know, when you get high on your horse, that happens fairly often. If you have any sense, you think, geez, I better be careful and tap myself down a fair bit, because if I get too puffed up, man, something's going to come along and take me out at the knees. And everyone knows that. Pride comes before a fall. It's like, if you have any, that's why it says in the Old Testament that fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. It's like, I've never, in all my years as a clinical psychologist, and this is something that really does terrify me, I have never seen anyone ever get away with anything at all, even once. You know, there's that old idea that God has a book, you know, and keeps track of everything in heaven. It's like, okay, you know, maybe it's not a book. Fine. But that is a really useful thing to think about, because, well, and maybe you disagree. Maybe you think people get away with things all the time. I tell you, I've never seen it. What I see instead is that thing happens, right? Someone twists the fabric of reality. And they do it successfully because it doesn't snap back at them that moment. And then like 2 years later, something unravels. And they get walloped and they think, oh my God, that's so unfair. And then we track it. It's like, well, what happened before that? This. Well, and then what? This. And then what? This. And then what? Oh, this. Oh, that's where it went wrong. It's, yeah, because you can't twist the fabric of reality without having it snap back. It doesn't work that way, and why would it? Because what are you going to do? Twist the fabric of reality? I don't think so. I think it's bigger than you. You know, and I think that one of the things that really tempts people is the idea that, well, I can get away with it. It's like, yeah, you try. You see how well that works. It's like you get away with nothing. And that is the beginning of wisdom. And it's something that deeply terrifies me. And, you know, ever since last September, when I came to more like broader public attention, one of the things, I've been terrified of making a mistake, because I certainly know I'm more than capable of making a mistake. And thank God so far, either I haven't made one or no one's found out about it. So, but it's like, you know, we walk on a very thin and narrow edge. And we're very lucky when things aren't degenerating into chaos around us or rapidly moving to far too much order. And it's not an easy thing to stay on that line. And you can tell when you're on that line, because things are deeply meaningful and engaging when you're on that line. But if you're not existentially terrified about the consequences of wavering off that, then you are truly not awake. So, and that's what I see in this picture. You know, it's like, look out, man, because there are rules. And if you break them, God help you.
There are people in this situation who have knowingly and actively colluded and indeed twisted reality. In the case of Heugene Murray, it's taken 13 years for the whole thing to start unraveling. And there are more shocking revelations to come. If you wish to support me in telling my story, please do so by supporting me on my Patreon page with the links in the description. Please like and comment in the comment section below. It certainly helps me to tell my story.